Hi, everyone. After lunch is always difficult to have people here, so thank you for being here. And well, it's not a community-based presentation, so sorry if we left some folks, but I think they're going to miss out. So my name is Joel. I'm managing director at Casper Labs. I'm going to be talking to you today about blockchain and public sector and why it's important and what's happening in that space. And you know, also to share with you a little bit about my experience and why Casper exists and what were the steps that we did as an enterprise to build the products that we build today. So before being at Casper Labs, I spent 15 years at Cisco, in which 10 of those years were actually in the smart city space. So I worked with governments and cities all around the world in building what we would call IoT platforms and software-based platforms to actually enable new services and new capabilities to citizens in cities all around the world. And for me, when I came to Casper Labs, moving from what we would call the Web 2 to the Web 3 space was just a natural consequence of this space. And for Casper Labs, as well, very interestingly, we started in 2018. We're more than 100 people, and we looked as a third-generation blockchain. We looked at the challenges that blockchains at the time, when Ethereum got out, were going through, and some of the challenges that prevent what we would call adoption, implementation, and adoption of blockchain solutions in any space, enterprise or public sector. So, what we started to look at was proprietary programming languages. Like, okay, if you are building something in a language that nobody else understands in the world, you know that it's going to be very challenging for a company to build long-term on those capabilities, specifically public sector. If you think about gas fees or what we would call the component that operates and manages the blockchain by itself, we see it today in exchanges when you want to buy Ethereum or sell Ethereum, but when you're thinking about just the blockchain component and how do you do transactions between elements within a public administration, for instance, you need operational costs. So how can we lower, or one, understand the gas costs, two, lower the gas costs, or even build what we would call gasless blockchains. And in that sense, that's also a challenge that we've identified early on. Upgrade path. Every time anyone here understands the concept of forking, you go to church to light a candle because you don't know if the blockchain is going to be broken afterwards, right? So the company itself started by building a blockchain as they were building a software company. It's not by chance that actually our CEO, Mernal, mentioned many times that we aim to be the Red Hat Linux of blockchain because we want to build an open source software that is easy to scale, deploy, and manage by organizations all around the world. And when you think about public sector, what we also see is that blockchains today, they lack these capabilities because by itself, in its essence, is just an iOS. So when you are looking into building capabilities, you need what we would call a layer 2 solution to be built on top that actually derives and stimulates value from the blockchain itself. Of course, as I mentioned, lack of expert knowledge. If you go to a public sector entity and you ask the coder or to the IT department there today, you're going to say, so do you know how to code in Solidity or in other components of other blockchains that are really high-end? And the answer is mostly going to be no. And for them, it's also difficult because from a legislation standpoint, they cannot just bring anyone else from the outside. They need to learn how to build, maintain, and deploy solutions internally. And last but not least, interoperability. We see that blockchains in the future will not be like one blockchain that will rule everything. In reality, what we will see in the future is that you'll have multiple blockchains, and the component and the key message that I think it's important is to understand how do we build the bridges that connect all the different blockchains, and how do we achieve that interoperability that makes all the different systems come together. If you think today, in the last century, let's put it this way, in the 90s, you had CRM tools, ERP tools, and they all had to learn how to communicate between themselves. And today, when you think about bridges in the Web3 space, that's the same thing. How do we build a way that can communicate with everyone? So when Casper Labs was created, the objective was simple. How can we solve all the problems of other previous generations of blockchains? And how can we build capabilities that can enable actually that we can build a platform for users, for governments, for enterprises. And that's important because when we think about what we would call today the trilemma of blockchain, about security, decentralization, and building something that is scalable, this is where we're going. And it's important for you to think about it when you're trying to work with enterprises. Even today, if you go to an enterprise company, they will look at you and they will say, are you ISO 27000 certificate? Do you have your SOC 2 compliance? Which is all of the process operational components that they have and that they aim to other companies to work as vendors to be able to be eligible just to work with them. So if you don't have these capabilities in place from start, you cannot even work with these companies. So for Web3 companies that are what we would call degens by itself, that's the challenge. How do we become small enterprises from a process perspective, from a certification perspective, so that then you can operate and work with these organizations? So setting up the context, of course, we think about these elements, right? Transparency, immutability, security. And these are elements that, at the end of the day, we just want to drive two main things. We either create new business processes for companies and enterprises and governments, or we become more efficient in the process and we cut costs. So any company, any government will say, I either want to reduce OPEX in my capabilities, or I want to create new services that citizens or other employees can derive and utilize from the day-to-day. So bearing in mind that then with public sector, you have the added difficulty of GDPR, which is, for instance, GDPR is just one main element. If you think about it, it's even more complex in the public sector, because I usually say, if you can manage to win in the public sector, you can manage to win anywhere. Because usually, traditionally, legislation is the biggest motivator to kill a project from start. Remember, innovative technologies like blockchain, like IoT in the past, and many others have always found ways to be halted by the lack of legislation. I did many projects in the IoT space that we would be in a component, for instance, of digitizing processes from paper to PDF, which today you might think, oh, that's really basic. But because the legislation was not in place, the project could not be done. And legislation, as you know, takes a lot of time to be done and properly approved in a government. So when you think about this, you need to think, how can I accelerate at a speed that will not only allow me to implement the technology, but make sure that for the long term, you can actually leverage it and make it survive. Because if you think about your identity card, which has a SIM card, or if you think about other digitization projects that governments build today, they're made for the long term. You cannot just do one pilot and expect the pilot to survive if the legislation in the background is not done. And I've seen that many, many times. When we think about blockchain in public sector, I wanted to share with you some of what some companies like IDC, Gartner, they're already looking at different use cases in public sector that can be applicable with the Web3 space. And these are some of them. And as I mentioned previously, and I would like to highlight it, it's about leveraging new business model creation or reducing costs or making things more efficient. As an example, and we've seen it already, the government in Estonia created an e-government platform that they used actually their own blockchain, GuardTime. We've seen in Switzerland certain projects that leverage blockchain, for instance, for COVID vaccination, meaning that any citizen would have a PDF with a hash key in the document, meaning that you could not fake it. Because, for instance, in the case of COVID, it was clear that certain people didn't want to be vaccinated. They wanted to falsify certificates, and with that, still continue to go to the disco or to the shopping or whatever. And the challenge there was that the governments couldn't control the citizens, and at the same time, it was a public health hazard. So certain elements of blockchain has been already applied with success throughout the world. And we've seen multiple examples. I'll also share with you guys some of the examples of what we have been building as Casper Labs. But some of the things that I would like to share here with regards to the government is on digital currencies, for instance, to stimulate new tourism use cases, attract people that can come and consume an experience that is completely new. If I'm a citizen and I arrive to Hamburg and I have an NFT hunting game that can help me explore the city with NFTs and capture them and bring a new experience by itself, which would be a Web3 geocaching experience, for instance. But you can also think about climate target tracking and assessment. For instance, how can I convert carbon credits into NFTs and actually do that tracking of carbon credits? Can be done in Hamburg Port Authority, can be done with vehicles. You just need to connect the sensors into a blockchain platform and track it in real time. You can also see other areas that I feel are important that I've been seeing recently, which is with regards to digital evidence management, which for government, it's incredibly important to have these types of capabilities stored in terms of evidence when you think about justice, legal rights, and how citizens have this type of data component done. And if you think about energy trading and smart grid, for instance, how can utility companies leverage blockchain, for instance, to actually monitor electricity consumption from one substation to the other substation? Again, national critical infrastructure at play, and Web3 having a very interesting step within the use case. You can think about it in the smart grid space. For instance, one of the biggest challenges that we have is loss of electricity within one point to the other, and how do you optimize that energy? So blockchain in that sense can be a good source of auditing and compliance. And at the end of the day, it is said, and we all know, that blockchain is the one of the biggest and strongest copyright technologies that really enable that capability of auditing and compliance to be active and to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening in the system. Intelligent transportation, we've been seeing also some use cases in that space, but more on battery life cycle management, charging, having your identity done as a wallet and managing that Web3 identity wallet. So what we're seeing here in terms of use cases is actually just the beginning, okay? And these companies, IDC, Gartner, many others, they tend to start to build the big picture, but then it belongs to the company by itself to start that mainstream adoption of the use cases. Now, I didn't want to leave without actually sharing with you guys what we are doing in the space, both enterprise and public sector government, because it is applicable to both. And I want you to give you a real clear picture of what's happening today and where we're going in the future. Just as an example, out of the multiple ones, we are working with IPOE, which is one of the biggest patent manager companies around the world. They're actually minting in our blockchain 25 million patents. And they have their own platform that is managing, through a set of algorithms, portfolios. And they are actually minting the patents as NFTs. And you ask yourself, so why would that be interesting? So when you think about patents, you think about proof of certificate, proof of origin. You think about a liquid asset, right? A patent is a piece of paper, but if I can make it liquid, then I can actually sell it and buy it faster, right? So I'm adding a capability to a component, to an element that didn't exist before, which we would call tokenization of an asset. With IPOE, what they're also doing is they're managing portfolio of patents. So what's happening is that actually they are able to derive more value from the portfolio that they're managing and identifying patents that are complementary to their portfolio. So very interesting use case. And going to the next one, we're partnering with Hyperledger Foundation. We're actually building a bridge in the Hyperledger, with the Hyperledger team, in which we bring added capabilities that Hyperledger doesn't have, but that Casper brings. Some of them are on the private blockchain. So some blockchains that have been built in the past, like Hyperledger, are private blockchains. We work more on the hybrid space. And the hybrid space means that we are able to expand the capabilities of the information that we share in a very different way, okay? And in that sense, for instance, a company can still own the NFTs, the patents, in a private blockchain, but then, for instance, share it in the public blockchain with other ecosystem players, just the information that they need. And that's very important because today, actually, you have either public blockchains or private blockchains, and some of the challenges with that is actually that if you want to share the information in a private blockchain, you can't, but you also, at the same time, if you're a company, you don't want to have it in a public blockchain because you don't want to put all of your private information out there for others to see. As an example, manufacturing companies that build sensors, for instance, they could only use private blockchains, because if they wanted to put everything on the public blockchain, all of their information would be out there for their competition. And as you can imagine, that's not good for the business. We're also working with Metacask, which is a fantastic use case in which we are, this is a very funny one. Metacask basically minted whiskey casks. So one whiskey cask, you can do 200, 250 bottles of scotch. And we're talking about 30 to 40-year-old whiskey, which is actually worth a lot of money. So by tokenizing whiskey casks, you're actually able to increase the capability of outreach of that NFT to a wider audience. You can track the cask from the distillery to the warehouse and then to your home, using a track and trace system, which is also very interesting because it can be applicable to anything in logistics space. We're working with the government of Telangana. Yeah, we're almost there, okay. Just to mention a couple more use cases, we're working with the government of Telangana in a factoring use case. Factoring for us is very interesting because governments always have challenges in accessing liquidity when they are building services and paying suppliers in their system. So by tokenizing invoices, they can improve liquidity. And finally, last but not least, within the public sector space, we actually worked with BSN in China, and we customized the blockchain to China so that they can actually, at the government level, we call it Chengdu chain in the city of Chengdu. So it is a open permissioned blockchain that has been customized that enables governments to build services on top of their services for citizens. So in essence, anything that can go from vaccines to land registration to identity management of a citizen can be done in these blockchains. And as I just mentioned, this is just the beginning. So thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, please come to me afterwards. Thank you.